Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Luffy ate God Devil Fruit Part 2. Before I start, please do support for more awesome content and subscribe my channel and like this video and also share this video with your friends. I have created my other videos playlist, there you can watch my all videos easily, check out as well. Let's start this video. Luffy is currently in the lower decks, the workshop in the 4th level more specific. He is trying to do something with one of the buggy balls he brought on board. He is being extremely slow and gentle with his analyzing as he didn't want to set it off. This is a strange cannonball. I mean, how did Big Nose even fit that much explosive power into a normal-sized cannonball? Luffy muttered as he slowly cut it open in half. If I could see how he did it, maybe I could create one of my own. The captain of the ship heard the door open. Yes. What is it? Luffy called out without looking, not letting his focus be disturbed. Well, we will be reaching the Gecko Island soon. Nami, the ship's resident temporary navigator, said to him. Luffy replied without looking once more. Then we will need to dock at the nearest port soon. Syrup Village is the closest one. Nami replied while trying to see what he's doing to the cannonball. Alright. Luffy just replied shortly. Pouting, Nami moved around him to see what he was doing to the buggy ball. What are you even doing here? I mean, what are you trying to do to the buggy ball? Luffy slowly opened it in half. I'm trying to figure out how Rudolph managed to make this cannonball pack with so much explosive power. I'm thinking of making some of my own to help with that trick that Oji-chan taught me. Nami recalled what he said and what accompanied it after. Yeah, about that, what kind of Oji-chan do you have that teaches you to throw a cannonball as if it was a baseball? The captain closed his eyes and moved his head slightly from the outburst. I would tell you all now, but I'm busy right now. So go ask Aka-chan. Just holler out if we are closer to the island of Syrup Village. Huffing at his calm and nonchalant reply, Nami turned and walked out of the room, making sure to slam the door on her way out. Luffy shook his head. What's her problem? He muttered as he went back to fiddling with the buggy ball. At the deck, Zoro was walking around aimlessly, absolutely bored after he woke up from his nap. He was contemplating going back to napping again when he got an idea. Looking around, the green-haired man found Makino just on top of the crow's nest. Oi Makino. Zoro called out, not caring if he was rude or not. Makino looked down from her telescope, glaring a little at Zoro for his rudeness, but sighed because she wouldn't be able to break him out of it. What is Zoro-kun? Can I spar with you? Zoro said straight and blunt, making Makino blink at that. Before she looked up to think about it and called out to him. Alright. I'm coming down. The mother figure jumped off the crow's nest and landed on the deck before she pulled her naginata off from her back and spun it before pointing the blade at Zoro and going into a stance. Zoro whistled in surprise and tossed his most prized sword into the air before he drew his 2 other swords, before catching the last sword in his mouth, before getting into a stance, ready to fight. The 2 weapon users looked at each other, none of them moving. As if waiting for a signal. A feather from a bird above fell and slowly reached the deck. 3. The birds above the ship flapped their wings, sending more feathers down onto the deck, as if to make the spar more dramatic with falling feathers around them. 2. Nami came out of the door looking a bit annoyed, but looked surprised at the 2 as the 1 feather passed her face slowly reaching the deck. 1. The world looked as if it slowed down and the first feather floated in between the 2 weapon users who looked ready. The feather hit the ground with a soundless thud. Zoro burst into action as he flew at Makino at high speeds, which Makino looked a little too slow, but she knew Zoro just wanted to test himself. Not being serious, Makino lifted her naginata to the left and blocked the first strike of Zoro's right blade. Zoro quickly disengaged as he spun to swing his 2 blades at Makino's right side. Makino swung a downhead strike and forced his swords to the ground before she jumped lightly to kick Zoro in the chest, launching him away from her. Grunting in surprise and a little pain, Zoro slid back and covered his chest before he looked at Makino with a slightly annoyed and resigned look. She's so powerful I can feel it. Heh, this will be fun, Zoro finished thinking with a smirk. Zoro dashed towards her again, this time slightly faster. Honestly surprising Makino a little as evidenced by her eyes widening a little. The 3 sword user started to swing his left blade at her in an overhead strike. She lightly dodged it, he then swung his right blade in a horizontal strike. Makino parried it with her naginata, Zoro suddenly followed up by spinning around her with a sidestep. Zoro then swung all of his swords including the one in his mouth at Makino. The naginata wielder just waited at the last possible second before she looked back slightly with a little mischievous smile. The eyes of Zoro widened as the Makino that he attacked turned glowing green before she dissipated. An after image, Zoro thought in surprise as he saw Makino at the other side of the deck with a small smile. Makino smiled a little more as she started walking before she started running at Zoro, suddenly dashing towards him, disappearing and reappearing around him, making him look around in slight panic. Makino suddenly appeared right above him as she raised her naginata before the glowing green blade was thrusted in Zoro's direction, launching her verdant needles at him. Surprised, and instead of dodging, Zoro just tried to deflect all of the green needles away from him. But some of them got past his guard and cut him around his left leg, his right arm, and the right of his chest. Makino stopped firing and disappeared again before appearing a little ways behind Zoro, who heard her and turned around and readied himself. Makino spun her Naginata, making the blade glow green before she disappeared and reappeared around Zoro a few more times, creating glowing green afterimages who also had spinning Naginatas. Zoro looked around him and prepared himself as all the afterimages swung their Naginatas in an upward swing, all of them launching a verdant blade each. Zoro looked surprised and spun around and created a tornado. Tatsumaki. His twister attack both defended him from the blades and cancelled both attacks out. Before Zoro felt a blade at his neck, looking to the left. He saw Makino with a small smile. He looked down to see the sword he pointed there held in her black hand. Makino let go and removed the blade from his neck. Zoro did the same and sheathed his swords, except for his prized one. "I lost," Zoro said. With a small smile, Makino nodded. "Yes, you did." Zoro stared at her for a bit. "The Grand Line is filled with people as strong as you?" Makino thought about it. "No." Zoro twitched a little. "There will be stronger foes than me, probably on the level of Luffy and above," she said with a sympathetic look. The first mate looked down at his feet. Before he felt a hand on his head. Looking up, he saw Makino with a bright smile. "But that just means you gotta get stronger." "Right," she said encouragingly. Zoro looked at his one sword. Wado Ichimonji, the sword of his precious friend. He smiled softly at it. "HMPH, I guess so," he said with determination. Nami watched the fight from start to end, with no small amount of fear and hope in her eyes. "Maybe they can really help me," she muttered to herself. The swordsman looked back up at her with a slightly puzzled expression as he remembered what he saw. "Say, Makino, what was up with your hand? It turned black?" he asked. Makino looked surprised before she lightly bopped her head with a closed fist. "I forgot about that. Well, I'll tell both you and Nami-chan." She turned towards the door that leads to the stairs going down and saw the navigator. "Nami-chan, come over here. You need to hear this as well," she called out. The navigator looked confused but walked towards them. "What is it?" she asked, confused, looking between Zoro and Makino. Makino looked between Zoro and Nami. "You two need to learn this, not just because it will give you an edge in battle, but when we go into the Grand Line, these will become a must," she started saying. The first mate and navigator looked at each other before looking at Makino. "What is it? Is it when your arm turns black?" Zoro asked, gaining Nami's attention as well. Makino nodded. "Yes, that is one of the trainable haki. Yuzushoku no haki or armament haki," she continued. Nami looked confused. "Haki? Force of will?" Makino shook her head. "It is more of willpower than anything. Haki is your willpower, everyone has willpower, but there are those who can harness their willpower into a weapon." Zoro looked at her hand and looked up at Makino once more. "They can harness it into different types, can't they?" Makino nodded and raised an arm before turning it black. "This is Yuzushoku no haki or armament haki, like I said earlier. This coats your body parts or your weapons. The coated weapon and or armor will become extremely durable and will be able to bypass devil fruit defenses." Zoro looked interested at that little fact. "What did you mean by devil fruit defenses? You mentioned that before, back when you told us about those skeleton soldiers." Nami nodded in agreement. Makino smiled a little. "Glad you remember that little bit, and devil fruit defenses are automatic defenses that a devil fruit user gains when they eat their fruit. Some don't have devil fruit defenses, and some are permanent even if their fruit becomes disabled." Makino started lecturing. Nami sat on a barrel while Zoro leaned onto the mast. An example of a devil fruit defense that has a permanent defense is a devil fruit called the Gomu Gomu no Mi, or the rubber fruit. When a person eats it, they gain the abilities of rubber, stretching and such. But they also gain extreme durability against blunt force trauma, and they can stretch like rubber, even if they are binded with kairaseki, or sea prism stone. Zoro and Nami listened to the resident mother figure intently. That fruit is a paramecia type, a fruit that alters your body in superhuman ways. Another example is the more rare loja type. These fruits give the user the power to control and turn into an element. They gain an automatic defense, but when they are binded with sea prism stone, they cannot use that defense. Nami interrupted her politely. "I'm sorry, but what is kairaseki? Sea prism stone? What is that?" The navigator's head tilted, looking confused. Makino giggled a little. "It's fine, but you both know that a devil fruit user cannot swim again, right?" The two nodded, she continued. "Well, the sea stone is a kind of stone from the sea that has the aura and feel of the sea, allowing it to be an effective counter against devil fruit users. But back to the armament haki can bypass even the permanent defenses of a devil fruit. So users are very dangerous to fight, even if you are a devil fruit user." Makino finished with a smile. Makino was about to continue when they heard a door open. teaching them about Kachan. The resident captain called out as he walked out onto the deck with a small smile. She looked at Luffy with a smile. Of course, you would have done it when you finished and came up here anyway, she said while she stood up. Luffy rolled his eyes. Yeah, but I would have had Zoro learn 2 things before he started hockey training. Well, Nami, I think you'd be better off training her instead of me. No offense, Nami, but I'm a little extreme when training, he said as he scratched the back of his head. Nami and Zoro heard Makino mutter that was an understatement and wondered how he trained. The captain clapped his hands. Alright, while we sail to the island, Makino will teach Nami about Kenbenshoku no Haki, or as it's called observation hockey, and how to train it, while I train Zoro. When we finish at that island, I want you two to keep practicing. The 3 nodded and Makino started to walk to a different area. Come on, Nami, I'll teach you about it somewhere else. Nami nodded and ran after her, leaving Zoro alone with Luffy. Luffy watched the 2 go to a different area before he turned back to Zoro, who looked at him. Alright, Zoro, I will have to teach you 2 things first. One will be that you need speed, you already have enough strength for now. But you don't have the speed to make your attacks truly deadly. Zoro nodded, assuming as much. I figured you would tell me that. I was planning on doing that as well. Luffy nodded and then smirked. But what speed training are you going to be doing? He asked with a small smirk, annoying Zoro a bit. Zoro shrugged and looked at his captain. I don't know, what? Luffy grinned before he vanished from view, making Zoro's eyes widen. He looked around wildly, hearing those high-pitched dashing sounds as if they sound layered. Over here. The captain's voice called out. Zoro looked towards the top of the captain's cabin. You will need this speed. It's one of the things my grandpa taught me, it's called Sora's shave. Luffy said, sitting cross-legged on top of the cabin with a smirk on his face. Zoro looked shocked before he shook his head wildly and looked at Luffy with a determined smirk. Interesting, this will help a lot. Zoro muttered to himself, but Luffy heard that, making his smirk grow wider. Just so you know, this training with me will probably make you regret you ever knew me. Luffy drawled out with a sing-song tone. Luffy disappeared and reappeared beside Zoro, who jumped a bit from the sudden appearance. The captain just stared at Zoro with a shit-eating grin, greatly annoying the green-haired man. But you just tell me how to train to do it already. Zoro yelled out with shark teeth, impatient as all hell. Laughing out loud, Luffy looked at Zoro with a normal grin now. To do this, you'll have to strengthen your legs, after that you will have to kick the ground 10 to 15 times in less than a span of a single second in order to launch yourself at a beginner speed of Zoro. Luffy revealed with a huge grin. Zoro's eyes widened. That sounds impossible. Luffy interrupted him with a serious look and voice. Making Zoro's eyes widen further as he took a slight back step, Luffy started walking around him slowly. The Grand Line is filled with things that are completely out of place and downright impossible. What I'm teaching you is not even 1/4 of what I need to teach all of you if I want all of you to survive the Grand Line. He grimly stated to his first mate with a serious aura. The said first mate looked down at the ground and gripped the sword of his precious friend. Kuina, I'm sorry, this will be a lot harder. Zoro thought to himself with a pained expression. Luffy watched apathetically as he saw Zoro fight with himself in a battle of wills between his ambition and his fear. He saw Zoro's shoulders slump and thought that the swordsman would give up when he raised his head with a determined glare, surprising him. Raising his sword to his silent captain, he glared at him with a determined stare. I made a vow to my old friend. That I would defeat Hawkeye's Mihawk and become the world's greatest swordsman. If I have to beat even you, then I will do it. It is my ambition and my dream. Zoro finished with a determined glare. Luffy stared at him before slowly grinning savagely. That's what I like to hear, and believe it or not, you are actually getting near the beginner speed. He said with a huge grin. He stared at Zoro. Well, why don't you start? Luffy said with a grin. The swordsman looked down at his feet and tried to do it. He only kicked a 3 when he jumped forward a bit and he couldn't control himself from falling flat on his face from a speed faster than he could control. Luffy stared at him with a shit-eating grin as Zoro glared at him from below. This will take a while, won't it? Zoro asked. The captain's grin just got wider. Oh, you have no idea. Luffy said, grinning so much it was a wonder his face doesn't hurt. At the bow, Nami was leaning on the railing while Makino was just standing on the figurehead. Now, for you, Nami-chan. You will be learning about Kenbenshoku, or observation hockey. Now I'm sure you are confused as to what that is, so I will give you an example. Makino started. The navigator then saw her turn around, jump off the figurehead and walk slowly to her, before stopping right in front of her and closing her eyes. Now, hit me. Makino said. Nami reeled back from what she just heard her say. What? No. I won't hit you. Makino smiled mysteriously. It's okay, you won't land it. She was slightly taunted. Now angry, Nami swung her fist to hit her cheek. Right hook to my left cheek. Makino intoned with a small smile before dodging the hit, shocking the navigator. Furious and slightly annoyed more than anything, Nami did a left hook to my cranium, dodged, and lashed out with a sweeping kick with her right foot, kick to my left side. Dodged again, now heavily annoyed. Nami slammed her right foot onto the ground and raised her left foot up high before trying an axe kick. The foot however was caught by Makino's hand by the ankle as she opened one eye with a small smile. And finally an axe kick to my head. She finished as she lightly pushed the foot up a bit, making Nami fall on her butt from loss of balance. Said navigator looked up at the coy smile of Makino with wide eyes and a half scowl on her face. "How are you able to predict my movements?" Nami all but yelled out at the mother figure. Makino walked to a barrel and sat on it before looking at Nami with a soft but stern gaze. "That was Kenban Shoku no Haki, or observation Haki. It allows me to use my will to sense the will of others, more on to just sense what their intent and next movements are. It's not a perfect defense, as even if you can see and predict the movement, it doesn't mean anything if you can't keep up with it." She finished with a small smile. Nami looked at her with a look of awe on her face. "And you're going to teach me this?" she asked, half excited and half scared. Makino did an eye smile at the navigator, who just felt a shiver crawl up her spine. "Yes. I will." Makino's suddenly cheerful and vibrant voice put Nami on edge. But sweat starting to fall down her forehead, Nami with a shaky smile asked. So, how are you going to train me?" The slight stutter at the beginning made Makino's smile grow bigger, scaring the poor navigator. Makino tossed something at the other girl before holding up a wooden stick. Nami caught what appeared to be a black cloth before looking up to see Makino holding a wooden stick over her shoulder. "Simple, you put on the blindfold and try to sense and dodge me while I whack you with this." The cheerful tone in her voice terrified Nami beyond measure. But Nami started before Makino interrupted her. No buts. You have to learn this if you want to even stand a chance against our future enemies," Makino said with a smile. Nami was internally crying and cursing Luffy for dooming her to this pain. Resigning herself to her fate, Nami put on the blindfold. Not before cursing the captain in her mind one last time. But said captain, "Achoo. Someone must be talking about me." Luffy mused to himself as he stared at Zoro's tired and panting form covered in sweat laying on the deck of the ship. "So, how's it hanging there, Zoro?" His response was only met with a middle finger. Laughing out loud, Luffy just grabbed Zoro's shirt and hoisted him up on his feet again. "Now we can't have you resting just yet. You need to at least learn to kick 5 times and control it." One day later, Zoro and Nami were just hanging on the railing on the port side, tired from the relentless training they'd been put through at the hands of their captain and his mom. "My body is sore from being hit so many times, I think I may have lost a few brain cells," Nami muttered a little loudly. Zoro just grunted and looked as if he was ready to just fall backwards and sleep. "Land ho!" Makino called out from the crow's nest looking towards the direction of the bow. Nami and Zoro turned their heads to their right to see the island. A door opened and Luffy came out looking around before spotting the island. Looking up, Luffy called out to Makino. "Alright, good job Kachan. Come down soon before we dock, okay?" Makino immediately replied back. "Aye Luffy-chan." Luffy shook his head with a smile before walking to the storage doors, opened them and jumped in to take note of what needs to be stocked up. At the island of Syrup Village, Captain Yusuf. "There is a huge ship coming towards here," shouted a little kid with green hair and the peculiar shape of a bell pepper. 2 other boys, one with purple hair covering his eyes under a red bandana and the last one with brown hair with a single tuft tied right on top making his head resemble an onion. "Wow Paimon, I almost believed that for a second. But seriously, there can't be any huge ship heading towards here," a long-nosed black-haired teen said confidently. That is until he saw from the corner of his eye the said massive ship. Eyes bulging at the side, he immediately flipped his goggles down while sweating a lot. Yusuf just started muttering in a sort of repeating prayer. "Please don't be pirates, please don't be pirates, please don't be pirates." He looked at the ship and frantically tried to see every single flag on that ship. Not seeing a single black flag with a skull on it, the teen sighed in relief before he saw a door open. He saw a black-haired giant of a man wearing a dark red cardigan with black pants and black boots, wearing a black captain's coat over it. He could only assume that he is the captain. He froze in horror though when he saw the man turn around and showed a very scary-looking Jolly Roger. "Ah. Pirate." The teen screamed out in fear. "We have to protect the village," the Onion Kid said with fear evident in his voice. The purple-haired one rounded on the Onion Kid. "Don't be stupid, Tamanegi. These are real pirates. We are only kids. We won't stand a chance." Paimon turned his head towards the two. "Quiet Ninjan. Tamanegi. We have to wait for the captain's orders." "Right, Captain," Paimon said as he turned towards Yusuf, who was just facing a tree muttering in a depressed voice. "This is all over now." The kid's eyes bulged and yelled. "Ah. Captain is having a meltdown." Paimon pulled out a trowel and was about to whack Usopp on the head with it when all of a sudden Usopp stood up and tried to look brave. "We need to protect the village," he shouted. It would have actually looked like an act of bravery if it wasn't for the fact his legs were shaking and sweat pouring off of him in rivers. Usopp shook his head and turned to the kids. "Alright. Listen here. I have a plan." The four then huddled into a circle to listen to Usopp's plan. On the boat, Luffy was about to take off his captain coat and fold it inside out when his arm snapped up in reflex and caught a bottle with a note inside of it. Uncorking the bottle, Luffy dumped the note out of the bottle before opening it. "Pirate. You will not harm this village, for I am the mighty godly Captain Usopp, lord of this island. Leave this island or you will face my wrath and the wrath of my 10 million men. Should you challenge me directly, head to this beach. From mighty godly Captain Usopp." The captain finished reading the note with a twitching eye. "Does this guy take me for a fool?" he said out loud, grabbing the attention of the other three. Zoro went to his side, Nami peeked over Zoro, while Makino was on Luffy's other side. The navigator looked at the note with a deadpan face and the same twitching eye. "He probably thinks pirates are stupid if he thinks that this lie will work on us," she muttered with a glare towards the note. Makino giggled. "Well, even if he does have that many, we have our own personal army maker here to help even the odds," Makino said with a smile. Zoro nodded with a smirk. "Yeah, so what do you say, Captain? What do we do?" the green-haired man asked. Thinking for a few seconds, Luffy smirked with a rather mischievous smile. "Alright, let's play a prank on this kid," Luffy said with a growing grin before he phased his spear and slammed the butt onto the deck. The ship changed course to the landing site. Veering off a bit from course, the ship turned to starboard side to get close enough to the island. Once near enough, the ship turned to port side and the sails furled up. Luffy started walking towards the starboard side, followed by the rest of the crew. The captain closed his eyes for a quick second before he turned on his left eye while keeping the right eye closed. A heart appeared before Makino, Zoro, and Nami each. Luffy's eye pulsed light and their hearts changed color to signify Luffy is now able to manipulate it. Turning back to the three of them, Luffy grinned. "I hope you don't lose your lunch," Luffy said with a shit-eating grin. Before he jumped high and the three were forced to fly with him via his power. Makino looked fine, but Zoro looked a bit constipated and Nami was screaming in fear with tears in her eyes. "On the island with Usopp, I didn't think that they'd actually go here," Usopp screeched like a monkey. Paimon turned his bell pepper-shaped head to him. "What do we do now, Captain?" he asked with fear evident in his eyes. The other two also turned their heads to him. Usopp paced back and forth while sweating madly. Then he stopped and a light bulb lit up above his head. "I have another plan," he said confidently before he disappeared with a cloud shaped like him in his place. The kids were about to think that their captain deserted them when all of a sudden he came back with a snap right next to the cloud carrying black tarps, though Ninjin saw what they were. "Those are our flags," he yelled out. Paimon and Tamanegi also saw that and were wondering what their captain was planning. They ran towards the bushes around the beach and started setting up multiple flags around the place and even created a runway of flags towards the top of the hill. Once done, he handed the 6 remaining flags to the kids, one in each hand. "Now, I need you 3 to stay in the bushes and hold these flags up. You shake your flags around when I mention how many men I have. That should scare them," Usopp stuttered out with as much confidence as he could. The kids could only look at each other and gulp, knowing that they'd be the ones closest to the pirates. They turned to their captain and nodded bravely, even though they were sweating profusely. Right above the Usopp pirates, the 3 pirates and 1 temporary pirate saw the kids go into the bushes and a teen who they can assume as the leader stood on top of the hill. "So that's the guy, huh?" Luffy muttered loudly to the other 3. Nami looked at the long-nosed teen with pity in her eyes. "I bet he doesn't even know what the majority of pirates are these days," she muttered just as loudly. Makino lightly swung her hand on top of the navigator's head, drawing a small ow from the girl. "Don't be like that, let him dream." "But yes, I believe he needs a dose of reality, and I'm assuming from Luffy's look, we will be the ones who will administer it," she finished as she looked at Luffy, who was staring at the long-nosed teen. "He looks familiar. Wait, perhaps he's Yasopp's kid. I'm only one way to find out." "Alright, let's get down there," Luffy simply said, and with that, he and the other 3 are now soaring down to the ground, intending to land at the beach. The 4 landed with a thud, but Luffy emitted a small shockwave that blew back the sand in a small pulse-like wave, creating a small sand cloud. The cloud dissipated to show Luffy grinning with narrowed eyes at the long-nosed teen, Zoro at his left side with a small smirk, with the same narrowed eyes looking up at the hill. Makino was on Luffy's other side smiling a creepy smile, while Nami just grinned with mischief-filled eyes. Up at the top of the hill, Usopp gulped silently to himself, but he steadied himself. "Pirates. I am the mighty godly Captain Usopp. I give you this last warning. Leave this island or face the wrath of my 10 million men," he screamed out. He saw the grin of the black-haired guy grow even wider when he said it. Oh please. That is a lie, I mean. How would you even hide that many on this wee little island? Luffy called out. Usopp jumped on one foot and covered his head with his arms and lifted his other foot to his chest. Ahhhhh. He saw right through it. Usopp screamed in a state of panic. Nami deadpanned. What's even sadder is that he didn't even try to deny it. She muttered while Makino was giggling silently. The teen started shaking before he collected himself and tried to form a menacing glare at them. I may not have 10 million men, but I do have loyal comrades in arms. Usopp yelled out. The 6 flags around the beach started waving around wildly. Nami huffed to the side. Don't you mean 3 kids? She called out loudly and a bit lazily. The said kids burst from their hiding spots. They found out. Ruun. The said loyal comrade screamed out before running like the wind, leaving a pale as hell Usopp with a hilarious horrified face. Usopp shook his head before he pulled out a slingshot. Back off. I may not have any of those, but my skill with a slingshot will make you think I fired a pistol. He yelled out desperately. Luffy hearing those words bowed his head, giving Usopp hope that he'd give up when. Are you ready to stake your life on it? He muttered loudly for them all to hear. Usopp looked confused. Luffy raised his head to reveal slightly glowing red eyes. That tool in your hand is not a toy anymore, it's a weapon. Are you really ready to bet your life on this? Because I am. Luffy finished by raising his spear and slamming the butt onto the beach, forcing another shockwave followed by a small earthquake. Zoro's grin grew even wider before he tilted his head back and looked at Luffy. Take a look kid, this guy is a true pirate. His statement made Usopp shake even more. The whole world seemed to gray out for a bit, the slow sounds of a heartbeat were heard. Ba bump, ba bump, ba dump. The whole world returned to color before Usopp fell to his knees. Just as I thought, a real pirate speech is amazing. Usopp muttered with an amazed and fearful expression. Makino couldn't help herself anymore and started laughing out loud, shocking the long-nosed teen. The burst of laughter was followed by Luffy, then Nami, and finally a chuckling Zoro. Further shocking Usopp, the laughter angered him a bit. Why are you laughing? He yelled out with bulged-out eyes and shark teeth. Luffy wiped a tear from his eye. Ha ha ha, relax guy, we aren't those pillage and loot kinds of pirates. In fact, we just wanted to dock here so we could stock up on some supplies. He finished with a grin. Usopp's jaw dropped into the ground, cracking it a bit. With a big grin, the captain pointed at Usopp. Anyway, you're Usopp's kid aren't ya? Luffy asked. His question caused Usopp to spaz out and fall down the hill, rolling to a stop in front of the group sitting on his ass. You know my dad, he screeched. Luffy nodded. Usopp somehow immediately stood up and dusted himself off. I know a place. Let's go there my treat, he said before he started walking away, unaware of the amused looks the 4 are sending him. 3 hours later, seriously? My dad did all that? Usopp was shocked that his father Usopp was such an amazing pirate. The long-nosed teen saw Luffy inhale a huge piece of mutton like it was nothing. Hell, he even ate the bone. Luffy swallowed the food before looking at Usopp with half-amused eyes. Yep, he was kind of annoying, but hey, he isn't Usopp unless he has this annoying factor, which I think you inherited a bit. Luffy finished with a teasing tone, making Usopp face fault at the last part. Makino shook her head before looking at Usopp. By the way, long-nosed kun, you're never gonna stop calling me that aren't you? He interrupted but she continued on like he didn't. I can't help but notice that some of the supplies that we could be buying to stock up aren't in any of the shops I've seen here. Do you know if there is anyone else who can sell us a few crates of woven steel wires, copper plates, and a few barrels of faded scarlet dust? She finished asking her question. Her question did confuse Usopp though. Why would you need those? He was confused as to why they needed those oddly specific materials. Nami deadpanned and turned her head to Luffy, who was busy stuffing himself with either meat or milk. Captain Glutton here wants those things so he could try and experiment with something stupid, she said with an annoyed face. Luffy gulped the food and looked towards the long-nosed one. Yep. She nailed it right on the head. I want those materials so I could do a few things. He inputted. Makino shook her head with a rueful smile. Don't even bother asking him what he is making. He'll just say it's a secret and walk away chuckling. It's actually quite annoying. Makino said, looking at Luffy with an amused glare. Ignoring the others for a bit, Usopp put a hand to his chin and started thinking. Maybe Kaya can help you out. Usopp admitted without much thought. The captain stopped eating for a second. This Kaya, she wouldn't happen to be the owner of that mansion up on that hill? He asked. Yes, the very same one. Usopp replied with a nod. Zoro decided to speak. Well, it seems that it will be our next stop after we finish eating. He said, only for Usopp to suddenly shout. You can't. Silencing the entire group, Makino and Nami looked at him with raised eyebrows, while Luffy and Zoro narrowed their eyes slightly at him. I mean, there is this one thing I need to do right now. So don't go there. That was the only thing he said before he dashed out of the small diner. Nami looked at Luffy, who looked to be lost in thought. "Luffy? Is there something wrong?" she asked, catching his attention. "Oh, what? Oh, it's nothing." Luffy quickly replied as he went back to eating like a madman who thinks this is his last meal. Zoro looked at him suspiciously. "We're still going, aren't we?" The question was more of a statement than anything with the way Zoro said it. Luffy nodded. Makino held her chin in thought. "Though I do wonder what Long-Nose-kun is up to when he tried to ward us off of going there," she murmured, but was still easily heard by the other three. Looking up, Luffy finished his mega meal before staring towards the mansion. "I don't know, but I bet it is interesting, especially if he tried to ward us away. Besides, we'll find out eventually when we get there," he said as he wiped his mouth with a napkin. Suddenly, the doors of the diner opened and the three kids from earlier ran in with wooden swords raised. Paimon tried to look fearless and shouted, "What have you done to our captain?" The kid said as the other two kids also repeated what he said. Luffy had a slightly funny idea. "Ah, that was very delicious." Luffy yawned out, purposely trying to look dramatic, which worked. DT delicious. Paimon and the two other kids dropped their wooden swords as they watched Luffy just scratch his stomach. Nami and Makino giggled quietly at the silliness of the kids. Zoro caught on and leaned his elbow onto the table while covering some of his face with his hand. "Your captain, we ate him." Zoro finished with a scary grin. A full second of silence before the kids hugged each other and went bulged eyes at Nami. "Aya. Onibaba. Why the hell are you looking at me?" Nami yelled with shark teeth while the rest were laughing at them. 3 swift bonks to the head later, the kids were rubbing their heads in pain. Nami looked at them with half-lidded eyes. "Your captain went towards the mansion. But he did it after he tried to get us to go away," she told them. The kids looked at each other. Could it be he? Yeah, he's usually there by this time, he's gone off to visit her. Those were the only things they heard from the kids' furious mumblings. Makino figured it out along with Luffy. "So, are we to properly assume that Long-Nose-kun went to the mansion to dismiss Kaya?" she asked with a raised eyebrow. "Yeah. Captain goes there usually at this time to lie to her," Tamanegi said. Nami frowned. "Why would you lie to her as a routine visit?" Nami said with disdain. "Oh. No. You got it the wrong way. He lies to her to make her laugh. From what the captain told us, she has always been sick and has been in her home and room depressed for a long time before the captain showed up." Paimon immediately replied, ignoring Luffy muttering. "Strange." Makino heard his mutter and did a small nod noticeable only to Luffy, who nodded back the same way. The captain and his mother stood up and started walking out. "We'll be back, you all just wait here," Luffy ordered in a semi-serious tone, making Zoro and Nami confused and a bit curious as to what they are planning to talk about. Walking outside of the diner, Luffy turned around to face Makino, who looked at him with a half-serious and half-curious gaze. "What's on your mind, Luffy-kun?" she asked him. "You know, now that I think about it, if this Kaya was sick, then why is she staying inside as well as being depressed for that long? It doesn't add up. She apparently has never left the sanctity of her home and stayed inside of her room mostly." Luffy began, gaining Makino's complete attention as her mother's instincts are alerting her to possible poor care of the girl. "You're right, if she's depressed then she should have been going outside or playing in order to slowly heal her depression. The fact that you can get sick if you don't get some fresh air every now and then also bothers me, since she apparently hasn't left her home since her parents' death." Unless Makino trailed off as she looked at Luffy alarmed. "We have to keep our guard up. Things are in play and I don't want us to be caught off guard," Luffy ordered with narrowed eyes, turning to the mansion. Makino nodded and turned back to the diner before turning back to Luffy. "You go on ahead, Luffy-kun, the other two and I will catch up later," she said and saw Luffy nod with a grunt before going back into the diner to fetch the two. Luffy stared at the mansion with a dangerous stare. He started walking towards the mansion, his coat billowing in the wind. A cart passed behind him and when the cart cleared, he was gone. Entrance of the mansion. Humming around from behind a tree, Luffy got back onto the road and started walking towards the gate. The sounds heard were only the clinking of his boots and the sound of metal on stone from his spear. After a minute or two of walking, the captain saw the gate in his sights, along with 2 guards who were a half a foot shorter than him. They saw him and straightened their posture a bit. The 6'4" captain stopped right in front of them and stared at them with an unblinking gaze, unnerving them a bit before he finally spoke. "I wish to speak with the master of the mansion," Luffy said in a semi-deep voice. The guards looked at each other and then nodded before the guard on the right opened the gate and went in while the other one looked at him. "Please wait, sir," the guard said with slight nervousness because Luffy was a full head taller than them. After a few minutes of waiting, the mansion doors opened and the guard, a butler with a lean build, black hair slicked back and glasses, and another butler with white hair and a bigger build than the other stepped out and walked to the gate. The 2 butlers were surprised at Luffy's sheer size and a little alarmed at the spear in his hand. The white-haired one looked up at his blank face. What is your purpose for asking an audience with Our Lady? The white butler asked with a serious face. Luffy's eyebrow gave an unnoticeable twitch. Rude. He said, which caused the four to blink. The butler with glasses coughed into his hand. I beg your pardon? He asked. The corner of Luffy's mouth twitched before he slightly bent his head down to look at them. You didn't even introduce yourselves before asking your question. Luffy said as he looked down at them. The four blinked again, before the glasses butler pushed his glasses up with his wrist, which did not go unnoticed by the captain. My apologies. My name is Clahater, this is Mary, and these two are Ren and Khan. He finished pointing to the white-haired one, the black-haired one, and the brunette one respectively. Luffy nodded and straightened himself. Pleased to meet you, my name is Luffy. As for your earlier question. I am a captain who docked at the port to restock our supplies, however some of the supplies we need aren't at the town, and some of the traders informed me that the lady of this mansion might have these supplies. That is why I am asking for an audience with her. Luffy finished as three other figures came up into view. Mary looked past him and saw the three and was about to say something when Luffy beat him to it. Those three are with me, the green-haired woman is Makino, the other green-haired one is Zoro, and the orange-haired girl is Nami. They are part of my crew. Luffy finished as the three stopped just behind him. Clahater looked at him again and nodded, albeit reluctantly. I need to speak with Oju-sama before anything though. If you are fine with this. Mary here can guide you to the guest room while I call for Oju-sama. Luffy nodded. It's not a problem. The glasses-wearing butler nodded and looked to Mary, who nodded as well and started to head back in first to talk to Kaya. The white-haired butler then turned back to them. Now if you'd please follow me, I will show you to the waiting area. He said, which was met with nods from the four. A few minutes later, Luffy and Makino were the only ones sitting on the sofa, while Nami and Zoro were on opposite ends of the room, Nami just staring out the window, while Zoro leaning against a pillar. The door opened to show a very pale white girl with pale blonde hair and light gray eyes, everything about her screams sheltered. She is wearing a silvery white dress with a purple cloth wrapped around her shoulders and adorable yellow foot warmer slippers. She bowed to them. Good evening everyone. My name is Kaya, I am sorry if my state of dress is not formal enough for this. Kaya greeted while still bowing before standing back upright and walking to the other sofa opposite of Luffy and Makino with Clahater and Mary. Makino shook her head. No, it is our apologies since you were sick and we still asked for you. She said while Luffy nodded. Kaya sat down and smiled at them before waving her hand. Oh no, I don't mind at all. It's pleasant to have some guests here every now and then. She said with an innocent smile and closed eyes. Luffy then asked her if she had any of the materials that they needed. Kaya thought about it and remembered she had a surplus of them in the storage house near her family pier. She told them this, and Luffy asked what would be the price for 5 crates of each. Kaya looked surprised that he asked for 5 crates of each. She told Luffy that she needed the surplus to be counted if there are that many crates for each. Luffy nodded and asked if they could come back later then. She nodded and said yes. Luffy stood up and reached over the coffee table and stretched out an arm to shake hands with her. She did the same and shook hands with him. Kaya looked to her right. Clahater-kun, please escort them out now, Mary will escort me back to my room. Clahater bowed. As you wish, Oju-sama. Kaya pouted. Mau call me Kaya like Mary and the others. She whined cutely at him, making his glasses shine and him smirk a bit. I'll try. It was obvious he liked doing this. Mary and Kaya then left the room, while Clahater then escorted the four back to the entrance. Luffy heard something. The captain turned on his heel so fast the other three behind him got scared and backed away from him. Luffy-chan. What's wrong? Makino called out to him with worried eyes. Luffy looked around trying to figure out that voice. Is everything alright? Clahater asked with confused eyes. Luffy looked back at him and in a direction behind them. No, everything is fine. I was just hearing things. The captain said as he started walking again, followed by the other four. When they came out they heard giggling. They turned their heads left to see Usopp in a tree doing weird hand gestures at the window. They couldn't hear him, but they could hear the sounds of a girl giggling. They then saw Kaya was laughing while leaning on the window. Clahater's eye twitched and fixed his glasses before he started walking towards them, forgetting about the four pirates. Nami looked disgruntled. Well, that was rude of him. She muttered while staring at Clahater. Luffy's eyes narrowed a bit and just walked towards them as well, confusing the others, but they followed him as well. When they arrived they heard Clahater talk shit about Usopp's dad. Usopp was about to punch him when Luffy intervened. Oh. A no good pirate you say? You do realize you're insulting the sniper of the red-haired pirates under red-haired Shanks' command, right? Luffy asked with a grin. Clahater looked winded at the famous pirate's name but looked at Luffy with eyes portraying his annoyance. Oh please, there is no possible way that is true. He said. Luffy's grin just got wider as he pulled out a snail transponder with red hair and 3 claw scars on the shell. Luffy then started to call Shanks, much to their surprise. Flick. Ben, you there? Luffy called out. Nami muttered while looking at Zoro. Ben Beckman. Zoro looked at her and shrugged. Huh? What? Luffy, that you? What are you calling at this time? You do know Shanks is still asleep, right? The snail spoke with Ben's voice. Luffy chuckled. My bad, my bad. Listen, is Yasopp there? A guy here is talking smack about him and his son Yasopp. As soon as he said that. My son is there, oi Ben. Give me that. Alright, geez, just calm down, will you? Ben sounded lazy and they heard the familiar clacks of the holder being switched. Yo. Anchor. You called for me? Yasopp talked, making Yasopp tear up a bit at hearing his father's voice. Luffy's eye twitched. Again with that anchor crap. Anyway, a butler here by the name of Clahatter just said you were a good-for-nothing pirate and that his son was a waste of space. Luffy finished making Clahatter and Yasopp twitch. Is that so? Well, bub, let me tell you something. Let's just say that the things that Yasopp says would make the foulest sailor blush with horror and envy. You got that, huh? Well, now that I've said my things, we gotta go now. Captain is starting to wake up. Luffy chucked. Good luck, I think you'll need it. Yeah, we will. Yasopp replied with a solemn voice. Hey, don't forget to call him Tomato Head, courtesy of me. Luffy laughed out with a grin. A grunt and a laugh was his answer before the call ended. Everyone apart from Luffy and Makino were shaken by Yasopp's words. But Clahatter just shook his head wildly and turned to Yasopp and the others and asked them to leave. Kaya looked sad, but she agreed and told Luffy and the others to come back tomorrow for the crates. Luffy nodded and he, Makino, Nami, Zoro, and Yasopp left the vicinity of the mansion. Yasopp ran off somewhere, saying he needed to go somewhere while the others walked towards the town. Luffy told them to go on ahead while he found Yasopp so he could talk to him. But the others, man, I can't believe the nerve of that guy. He was so rude, I kind of get angry at the mention of his name now. Nami complained while waving her arms to the sky. Zoro looked towards her. Tell me about it. But there was something about him that didn't seem right. He felt kind of off, somehow. He muttered. His words also invoked that feeling in Nami. You're right, he seemed a bit strange somehow. I just can't place my finger on it. Was it the way he fixed his glasses? Nami asked. Makino's eyes slightly widened. Why didn't I see it before? She muttered, but not loud enough for the others to hear. There's no doubt about it. That was Captain Kuro of the Black Cat Pirates, but news reports indicate that he was arrested after a mutiny. Seems like it was planned. I shouldn't be too surprised at that. He was called Kuro of the Thousand Plans. Makino thought to herself with an uncharacteristically serious look on her face. Nami noticed Makino's serious look. Makino-chan. What's wrong? The question brought the green-haired woman back to reality before raising her hands to her chest and waving her off. Oh. It's nothing at all. Makino replied with an eye smile and with an innocent tone, a tone that Zoro isn't buying as evidenced by his stare. But his stare was averted somewhere else when he saw something. Is that a guy moonwalking? Zoro asked, looking incredulous as if he wasn't believing what he was seeing. His question brought the attention of the girls. Yes, that is a man doing a moonwalk. Makino confirmed what they were seeing. Nami deadpanned at the view. Why do I get the feeling we will see even weirder stuff in the future? She said in a half-annoyed and half-dead voice. Makino raised a hand to her mouth and giggled quietly. Well, Luffy always has been a magnet for the strange. Even when he's not with us. She said with a small chuckle. Nami looked at her with a slightly dead stare. Is it too late for me to back out? She asked as they saw the three kids from earlier go close to the weird man with the heart glasses. Makino shook her head with an amused smile. There is no escape. Once Luffy sets his eyes on someone, he won't stop until they join him. Her answer made Nami's shoulders slump dramatically as she sighs in defeat. They were interrupted by Zoro's yell. You even fell for your own trick, he yelled with shark teeth at the four sleeping idiots, 3 kids, and the weird man sleeping with snot bubbles from their nostril. I am line break. Throwing another pebble to the sea, Yasopp sighed and sat on the cliff swinging his legs while looking at the blue sea lost in thought. He heard another person walk up to him and turned back to see Luffy. Who just nodded at him and sat beside him on the cliff. So, I'm guessing you and that butler don't get along really well, huh? The captain asked. Yasopp looked down and nodded a few times. Yeah, the annoying bastard always doesn't like it when I visit Kaya-chan. He lamented with a slight growl. Luffy snorted. That sounded like an understatement. It looks like he hates your presence more than anything. The responding silence stretched for a bit as neither of them decided to speak for a while. Finally Yasopp turned his head to look at Luffy. So why did you follow me here? His question received a response of him turning his head slightly, then turning back towards the horizon. I decided you're joining my crew. Luffy said it nonchalantly, as if he was talking about the weather. Oh cool. Yasopp turned his head back towards the horizon until his mind caught up and registered those words. He jumped onto his feet and was about to screech. YMMPGHGHFS. He was silenced by Luffy's hand, who raised his other hand and brought it to his lips in a shushing motion. The long-nosed team nodded and watched as Luffy lowered his hands and looked down the cliff. He followed his line of sight and saw the damned butler Clahater and a weird guy with heart glasses. He whispered to himself. Why the heck are they here? SHH. Luffy shushed him again so they could hear what they were saying. Which seemed to be about cat pirates, Kuro, Raid Town, and tomorrow. Luffy nodded to himself. I knew something was off, he looked way too similar. So this is where you have been hiding, huh? Kuro of 1,000 plans. Alright, we'll play your game. He muttered with a creepy smile. Usopp jumped to his feet. This is bad, we have to warn the town. He was about to go running when Luffy grabbed his arm. He glared at the captain for stopping him, but Luffy glared back, which wilted his glare. Think, idiot. You're the town liar, and Clahater is the loved butler of Lady Kaya. If you were to say that there were pirates, as well that Kuro is the captain of said pirates, the villagers would maul you alive. His words struck a chord within Usopp, but he still looked determined. I still have to try. Luffy snorted but let go of him and watched as the long-nosed liar ran to the village. He shook his head and walked behind a tree, then he was gone. 5 hours later, and that was what happened. Luffy told the three with a slight deadpan tone. Makino nodded. I figured as much as soon as we left. If a pirate like him would want to retire, then he'd do it so he wouldn't have to work for a long time, probably assassinating Kaya, but for him to get the money, it would require a will signed by her. So he'll probably keep her alive. She said. Luffy and Zoro agreed. Nami suddenly stiffened and said aloud. The weird guy, he's a hypnotist, and you said you saw him with the pirate, right? Luffy nodded, now understanding just how he plans to get the will. They were about to discuss a bit more when they saw Usopp shuffling towards them, with various cuts and bruises all over his body. He looked at Luffy and smiled shakily. You were right. That was all he said before he slumped against a tree, tired. Luffy looked towards Makino and gave a silent motion of his head to the team. Said green-haired woman nodded and jogged to Usopp and started patching some of his wounds. Luffy looked back at the other two and smirked at them. Looks like we get to see the results of your training. He said with a huge shit-eating grin. Zoro smirked while Nami slightly panicked but sighed in resignation. Luffy then stiffened, drawing the attention of everyone, minus Usopp, who was joking to the 3 kids who found them and told them to go home. Luffy stared to the north. They have a ship banked on the north. Near our ship. He smirked a slightly scary grin, making the others except for Makino sweat. Once they come, we will be waiting. The next day, the captain of 3+1 in denial sat in a tree, staring off at the northern bank. At the cliffside he smirked as he saw the black cat figurehead and flag on a ship. Looking down at the 4, he called out. Here they come. Ready yourselves. His words gained 3 determined nods and a shaky one. Once the ship docked beside theirs, the pirates started going onto land, all the while staring in slight fear at the size of the ship that was beside theirs. They were however interrupted from their musings when they saw 4 people on top of the cliff. A pirate called out to their leading commander. Oi Django-san. You said we wouldn't meet any resistance. The weird guy from before, now named Django, bit on a napkin and started raging. An unseen element, boss hates that. We have to get past them at all costs. Adiak. Django said while pointing at them and readying several chakrams in his other hand. The pirates roared out a battle cry in unison and charged at the 4 people, only for few to start getting shot down by either normal pebbles, hot sauce pellets, and even explosive pellets. Usopp fired those in rapid succession with his slingshot, which was impressive for such a small thing. Nami moved to guard Usopp's front, while Makino and Zoro drew their weapons and charged towards the mob of pirates. Zoro spun and created a small tornado. Tatsumaki. His attack lifted some of the pirates, all the while cutting them up and throwing them down the ramp. Makino on the other hand jumped high and did rapid thrusts with her glowing green Neginata. Verdant needles. Her move then launched several verdant needles the size of ice picks and stabbed into most of the enemies that tried to stare at it because of Zoro's attack. Some of the other pirates were more durable than they thought, and some got past them. Nami readied her staff by twirling it and slamming the butt of it into one guy's face, while doing a sweeping kick to knock down 3 at once. She then spun around doing various acrobatic moves to dodge all of their attacks with ease. Nami was amazed. Wow, I can't believe I can read their movements this well. I have to focus though, come on. Focus, Nami. Girl power. Her inner chant, however, had the opposite effect and was about to get hit by a fat guy with a club when he got shot in the face with another explosive pellet, courtesy of Usopp. Nami turned to him and he flashed a thumbs up. The orange-haired navigator nodded and resumed her stand while Usopp supported her. However, the Django guy did something, and now the next wave of pirates had no concept of pain, and their strength increased, as evidenced when one smashed a piece of the cliff with just a swing of a fist. The four of them held their ground against them under the watchful eye of Luffy, but too many got past the front line, so Nami and Usopp were overrun, and the pirates were about to head to the town when Luffy appeared out of nowhere with a serious face and did a half-hearted swing of his spear. That half-hearted swing however resulted in a powerful shockwave that threw back the pirates in front of him and even the ones at the front line. The winds however ignored his four crew members, much to the shock of everyone but Makino. The wind stopped but the damage was done. All the Black Cat pirates were now back at the start, sweating in fear that he just threw them all back down with one swing only. Luffy slammed his spear into the ground and just stood there before calling out. Again. Zoro, Makino, you take care of any stronger foes in your front line, while Usopp you support them from afar. Nami, you on the other hand, will stay by Usopp's side to defend him again. I will step in when needed. Remember, this is only training. He finished with a serious air and a red gleam in his left eye. His four crew members shook their heads to clear their thoughts and nodded at the order. While the BC pirates were shocked that this guy said that they are only training his crew, Zoro smirked with sweat dripping down from his brow. Aw, come on captain, can't you give us a little break? The BC pirates screamed internally. That's their captain. Luffy smirked. In the words of my grandfather, if you can fight very well when you're tired, then you will fight even better when you're fully rested. So no, and get back to it. Luffy yelled at them. Zoro and Nami just shook their heads while Makino giggled. Usopp, however, gulped. What have I got myself into? He thought somberly to himself. Dango grinded his teeth together in anger and fear before rounding towards the ship. Sham. Buchi. Sounds of rapid running filled the air as two figures leaped from the ship and onto the ground in front of Django. A dark green-haired man with a lanky body stood hunched over. I'm Sham. A loud thud and a man that looks more like a fat vampire than a cat stood upright. And I'm Buchi. The two then struck a weird pose. We are the Nyambin brothers. Their intro silenced the whole field, with Luffy and his crew not knowing how they should react to the display, while the BC pirates all facepalmed. Django shook his head and started yelling at them. Listen. We need you to clear the path for us so we can all get up this damn slope. These guys are proving to be a huge pain in the ass. The two turned their heads to the captain and his crew on the slope and immediately hugged each other in fright. But they look so strong. They said with crocodile tears. Zoro, Nami, and Usopp looked somewhat relieved and annoyed at the apparent weak rivals, while Luffy and Makino narrowed their eyes at their display, not buying their act. Sham's scared face turned into a sickening grin and he leaped at Zoro, followed by Buchi. Zoro, who let his guard down and didn't react fast enough, lost two of his swords, leaving only his prized one that belonged to Kuina. Sham threw the swords to the bottom of the slope while Buchi started attacking Zoro head-on, and Sham started making attacks at Zoro's back while he was occupied by Buchi, but was interrupted by Makino, who slashed her Naginata at him, making him jump back. I'm sorry Cat-kun, but your fight is with me. She said as she brought her Naginata up and slashed it down, launching a verdant blade at him. Zoro could only parry the fat man's claw attacks, as his attacks with one sword aren't as effective as they should be, while Makino was essentially just chasing Sham around as he was running away from her flying blade attacks, in fear of actually getting sliced in half by them. Usopp saw she didn't need help, so he tried supporting Zoro, only to get yelled at by him, making him do essentially nothing. Nami saw Zoro was having trouble since he wasn't used to fighting with only one sword, and told Usopp that she'll be right back. Luffy saw what she was doing but didn't comment on it, but merely smiled. She ran past the four fighters and came upon Zoro's swords, but was stopped by Django himself, the rest of the pirates just laying in various states of injury around them. Django waved a finger as if to scold her. Now Missy, I can't let you have your way here. You want these swords, you gotta fight me first. He finished as he pulled out 3 chakrams on each hand, fashioned in a yo-yo way, each tied to an individual finger. He started by throwing the chakrams in his right hand. His unique fighting style involving a yo-yo-like chakram completely confused her, but she was able to hold her own. However, her staff is starting to get too damaged. So she threw her staff at the right moment, causing his 6 chakrams to wrap the strings around the damaged staff, effectively neutralizing his hands. Nami used this moment to grab the 2 swords with both her hands before spinning on the spot and throwing the blades at Zoro, who saw what she was doing and placed his prized sword back in his mouth and caught the other 2. Makino saw that he had his swords back before deciding to end it and grabbed the running Sham and tossed him at Zoro. Zoro started spinning once more. Tatsumaki. His attack threw the 2 BC pirates into the air. Makino jumped high while Zoro stopped and readied his blades. Makino swung an overhead strike. Verdant blade. Zoro dashed upwards to the 2. Toragari. The 2 attacks together caused the Nyambin brothers to gain huge X wounds on their chests, with one line being 3. Dango freed his hands and was about to attack Nami when a voice made himself known. What is going on here? All heads turned to the source to see Clahater. You are late, Django. You know I don't like it when my plans don't fall into place. Django stuttered. Sorry Captain Kuro, but don't call me that. Kuro interrupted the man with a yell. Now, I give you all the time limit of 3 minutes to deal with this riffraff. Django started sweating even more. But he was interrupted again by the suddenly rejuvenated Nyanban brothers who started going on about how they'd beat him up since he got lax, but Kuro just easily disposed of them. The two brothers fell at the bottom of the slope and were knocked unconscious. You're right, I am a bit slower than I normally was. He said as he fixed his glasses in his iconic way. Kuro was about to say more things when Kaya revealed that she followed him, asking why he was doing all this. Kuro replied that he hated her and that it was he who poisoned her parents causing them to die, along with me poisoning her food to keep her sick and weak. Kaya dropped the gun and broke down crying. Kuro went on another tirade, and when he mentioned that a pirate doesn't have comrades only pawns, Luffy got quite mad as his crew members heard that music faintly, but slower and calmer. They all saw Luffy pick up his spear and slowly walk towards the monologuing man and stopped right behind him. Luffy placed a hand on Kuro's shoulder, finally drawing his attention, while Usopp told the kids who just arrived to get Kaya to safety. Congratulations. His words confused everyone but worried Makino. You're one of the few who actually managed to piss me off. His shadowed face revealed a single glowing eye, showing it was active. The captain spun around with the man in his grip before throwing said man at a cliff off to the side near the slope. Kuro's body slammed into the cliff, creating a crater and an indent of his body in the middle of said crater. But he managed to land on his feet and looked up to see Luffy right in front of him. He backpedaled to the wall and looked shocked because he knew that he was thrown far, but this guy managed to get to him just as quickly as he flew. Luffy started walking slowly, the clicks of his boots made for a threatening sound, combined with his single glowing eye. You are one of those that think that pirates are not your comrades. You fail as a pirate. It's no wonder you wanted to quit being a pirate. You are a terrible one in the first place. If you think that crew members are expendable, look at my crew. I found them all in less than a week, minus Makino cause I helped with her training in the first place. Luffy's words got several reactions. Makino leaned on the cliff wall smiling at her surrogate son. Zoro smirked and even nodded to himself with closed eyes. Nami blushed and fidgeted under his praise, and of course, Usopp puffed his chest out trying to look cool but failing epically. The straw hat wearing captain smirked and phased out his spear. If you can't even call your crew comrades while out at sea, then you don't deserve to be a pirate. Luffy finished with a yell before throwing a semi-fast left hook, but Kuro almost got hit by it and ducked and weaved at the last second to look behind him to see Luffy's punch completely eradicated the cliff into dust. The said dust cloud somewhat covered Luffy and gave him a shadowed look, which combined with his glowing eye made him look even more menacing. Kuro panicked and readied his cat claws. You know nothing. He desperately said as he started sprinting around Luffy at different angles, but Luffy just used his bare hands to block and parry each swipe. Making Kuro even more desperate, Luffy finally had enough and just phased out and reappeared to kick Kuro towards the BC pirate ship, which Nami was raiding, while he was messing with the guy. Kuro landed sprawled out on his back in front of the ship before getting onto one knee panting. He looked at Luffy, who landed on pretty much the entrance of the slope, staring down at him with his single glowing eye. The black cat captain grit his teeth and his glasses shone. Don't you look down on me. Luffy smirked internally. He's lost his cool now, he should be easier to deal with him. Luffy's musing was cut short when purple smoke started coming out of Kuro. The captain noticed the BC pirates shaking in their boots, pleading to their captain to not use that move as they were in the crossfire. Luffy saw Kuro disappear similar to Soru, but what he saw next definitely pissed him off supremely. The Black Cat captain used uncontrollable speed and attacks to hit his target in the poisonous cloud, but since he couldn't control his speed, he attacked pretty much everything, including his fallen crew members. Luffy saw red and used Soru and grabbed Kuro by the neck and slammed him into the bow of the ship. Luffy's right eye actually became active in his rage, which was not unnoticed by his crew members, including Nami, who came out and was beside Makino. You dare to sacrifice your own crew members to get to me, that's it. I was gonna leave you alive, but after that you are dead. Luffy bellowed out before pulling back his arm and throwing the man to the boat, making him blast through several walls within his ship and out the other. But before he could even fall into the water, Luffy phased above him with two glowing eyes active. He held out his hands in a grabbing motion, controlling Kuro's soul and lifting him up before his eyes pulsed, and he crossed his arms together, making several bones appear and fly into Kuro, piercing him on all sides. Luffy landed on top of the BC ship and started slamming Kuro into the ship so many times the man actually died. Luffy saw his soul shatter. What? Oh no. I'm not finished with you yet. Luffy's eyes pulsed even brighter and Kuro's soul returned back, essentially bringing him back to life. The angry captain made Kuro comes to a stop in front of him. Now, where were we? Luffy muttered to the terrified man. Luffy slammed him into the deck of the ship and jumped high and created several G-blasters that fired beams of energy one after another. Pretty soon, the man died again. But Luffy brought him back once more. But the others, Nami and Usopp, were terrified beyond belief, while Zoro was scared as hell. Mikino, however, was very worried, and for good reason. She only remembers him telling her that the only time he used that technique would be at the Grey Terminal when Sabo was injured and nearly killed. The ability to bring back the soul comes with a cost. Each use of the ability takes a level of the overall nutrient mass in his body, making him weaker for a while, at least until he regains those levels back. But if he uses it too much, he can kill himself with it. Mikino started running to Luffy, dodging stray bones and energy beams, all the while seeing Luffy's skin grow paler and his skin turn a bit gaunter. He reset Kuro 6 times now. Mikino hopped onto the bigger bones and jumped from each one to reach closer to Luffy before she tackled and hugged him onto a Geister blaster that flew to catch them as they sensed their master falling. Mikino hugged her son and whispered a sweet lullaby to try and calm Luffy down. "My dear child, not mine, credit goes to the owner who I don't know. Is it an Undertale fan song I think? My dear child, 'neath my sheet, you're so precious and sweet. Diamond shine, silver, gold, hell not your value untold. I have searched all over the earth, far and wide, but nothing can compare to the treasure by my side. My darling child, though you may wander far, you will know your mother dear will forever be near. My dear child, I have known, one day, you'll be big and grown. If you stray, far you'll roam. Your mother will guide you home. My beloved child, please stay here, in my arms. While you're still small and fragile, I will keep you safe from harm. No matter what choices you'll have to make, your mother will stay by your side and sing you through the night." Lullaby end. Luffy's eyes stopped glowing and ceased activity, finally releasing Kuro's soul, which passed on. Luffy looked sick, and his eyes, normally filled with playfulness, were now a bit dull. "I'm sorry." His voice was barely a whisper, but Mikino just hugged him closer to her chest and whispered that it was okay, everything is okay now. The Geister blaster they were on floated to the ground to assist their master and his mother to the ground, all the while the rest of the G-blasters and bones phased out. When Mikino and Luffy hopped off, the G-blaster was the last to phase out when Luffy raised his head and stared at the pirates. "Leave." Nothing else was said, as the pirates started to salvage any lifeboats and/or started swimming away from the island never to return. The next day, Mikino was waiting outside of Luffy's secret room. She knew that Luffy was always in there whenever he was very weak. Mikino was worried but could hear Luffy eating like a madman in there. She felt that the door was unlocked and felt it would be invading her son's private space, but she was worried for Hai come in. Blinking a bit, Mikino entered, then closed and locked the door. She took a deep breath and turned around to see Luffy looking at her while eating a rather huge piece of Sea King meat. Luffy looked a bit healthier now, but still a bit pale. His eyes, much to her joy and delight, were now shining bright again with playfulness and mischief. "So Ka-chan, what are you doing here? Want a bite?" Luffy asked with a mouthful of ribs while handing out a plate of Sea King steak. Luffy gulped down what he was chewing. "Did you know that Sea King meat has the same nutrients as ordinary meat, but it is more potent?" Mikino sighed in relief and sat beside him and took the plate offered to her with thanks. She then started eating slowly, unsure of what to say. Luffy's eyes shone with mischief. "Did you think I was having some rather adult class fun here?" he asked with a smirk, and found it hilarious when Mikino suddenly choked on her meat and hit her chest a few times and swallowed it with the help of the water she was handed. After panting a bit to get some sweet air, Mikino turned her head to glare at Luffy with a blush on her face. Luffy was laughing rather uncontrollably. She sighed for what seemed like the millionth time, but smiled at him since he was mostly back to normal, but still. "Do you want to talk about it?" Her question pretty much brought Luffy to an instant halt. He scared her with his silence as he eats just as slowly. Finally, after what seemed like hours, Luffy shook his head. "There is no need, I've come to terms with it. What I'm angry about was my loss of control and the fact I used reset so many times, just for one guy." He muttered, but it was loud enough for her to hear. Mikino's eyes softened and stood up and placed her hands on his shoulders before looking up to see a shrine to Luffy's mother. Using a picture that was left by his grandpa Garp. She was a tall with soft coal black eyes, pale skin, and an hergless figure that would make supermodels green with envy. She was wearing a simple red shirt and blue shorts, red beads in her hair, along with a necklace that Luffy now wears around his neck. Luffy chuckled quietly. "You know, it's like I actually knew her. I remember her face and her singing that lullaby to me. The same one that you used to calm me down, Ka-chan. Do you think she'd still love me if she were still alive?" he asked quietly. Mikino smiled softly and hugged him with a motherly love, patting his head gently. "If she is anything like the stories Garp told you about, then yes, she'd love you no matter what." She finished with a soft squeeze of the hug. She released him and looked at the shrine before seeing something catch her eye. Turning her head right, her eyes widened. "Luffy, what is that?" Luffy followed her line of sight and grinned. That is our. The two stared at what seems to be schematics, as well as parts laying around the desk. A few days later, Luffy and the others were by the ship, which was now docked at the private pier of Kaya, which showed a rather homey-looking caravel beside the behemoth sea dragon's blade. Kaya herself was there along with a bandaged-up Mary. Makino was smiling softly while Zoro and Nami were still sending cautious, in Zoro's case. And/or worried, in Nami's case. Looks at his back. Kaya was thanking them all for protecting them from Kuro's pirate attack. She asked if there was anything that she could do for them before they left. Luffy was about to say yes when they heard screaming. They all turned to see Usopp rolling down the slope with an abnormally huge backpack. Kaya was lifted out of the way by Mary, while Zoro and Nami raised their foot to stop him, Zoro's foot landing on his stomach, while Nami's foot was on his face. SHS thanks. Usopp thanked with a slight slur. He stood up somehow looking fine when he saw Luffy and started sweating upon seeing him, but Zoro put a hand on his shoulder and shook his head. Usopp gulped audibly but nodded and stopped shaking as much. Luffy looked at him for a bit before turning his head to Kaya. Actually, there are 3 things you can do. Kaya smiled at him while Mary looked a bit cautious. What is it? Kaya asked. Luffy grinned widely. First, Usopp becomes our new member. Kaya, Mary, and Usopp blinked. The 3 said together. But Luffy continued on. Next, that caravel is ours. He finished while pointing to the ship. The 3 blinked again. Luffy clapped and grabbed hold of Kaya's hand and tossed her up and put her over his shoulder. And lastly, you are coming with us. Luffy said with a nonchalant look. This time all of them excluding Luffy screamed after a moment of silence. The disbelief and bug-eyed looks all of them had made Luffy laugh uncontrollably. His laughter was heard as everyone besides him argued about why he would do that, but he just tuned them out. Luffy's grin was wide because he spoke mentally with that voice. I finally found where you were. Now you are going to go on an adventure with us, okay? Luffy mentally said with an internal grin. He felt the wind grow warmer around him. I look forward to it. Captain. Luffy's grin grew wider. Say, my name is Monkey D. Luffy. What's your name? I'm going Mary. Pleasure to meet you, Captain Luffy. Thanks for watching this video. Part 2 is over. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. And also check out the playlist that I have created and enjoy. Link is in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.